Think your partner checking your phone is invasive? In medieval castles, suspected adultery meant having your nose sliced off in the town square, while your neighbors placed bets on how long you'd scream. I'm talking about real punishments that make Game of Thrones look like a Disney film. For centuries, the stone walls of Europe's grandest castles witnessed horrors specifically designed to destroy women accused of infidelity. Punishments so calculated, so public, so permanently disfiguring that death would have been the merciful option. Today, we're walking through castle corridors most history books conveniently skip. The question isn't whether these punishments happened, it's how anyone survived them. Before we descend into this nightmare, do something for me. If you believe history isn't just dates and dead kings, but the raw, uncomfortable, absolutely brutal truth of human existence, smash that like button. Subscribe because we're not just reciting facts, we're uncovering what they didn't teach you in school. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and whether you think you could have survived medieval justice. Now, let's descend into the darkest chambers of castle punishment, the scold's bridle, the silence of shame. Let's start with something that looks almost quaint in museum displays, until you understand how it actually worked. The scold's bridle was a metal cage locked around a woman's head, but here's the part they don't show in the exhibits. Most versions had a 2-inch iron spike that pressed down on the tongue. In Walton-on-Thames, England, 1567, Margaret Davy wore one for 3 days after her husband accused her of entertaining a merchant. Every time she tried to speak, plead, or even swallow, that spike tore fresh wounds into her tongue. Imagine having a metal cage padlocked around your entire head. You can't eat, the jaw won't open far enough. You can't drink without choking on your own blood. You definitely can't explain that your husband's accusations are complete lies. The worst part? This wasn't done in private. Margaret was paraded through town, the bridle's decorative bells ringing with each forced step, announcing her shame to every baker, blacksmith, and former friend. The Shrewsbury Chronicle describes one woman in 1590 who wore a bridle for 6 days. When they finally removed it, she'd bitten through part of her own tongue trying to shift away from the spike. Medieval society's message was crystal clear. A woman's voice was the first thing to destroy. If you couldn't defend yourself, you couldn't maintain your innocence. These weren't reserved for proven adultery. Suspicion was enough. Gossip was enough. Your husband having a bad harvest and needing someone to blame, that was definitely enough. The bridle was the medieval version of a Twitter mob, except instead of trending hashtags, you got permanent scars and the lovely experience of starving while surrounded by food you couldn't eat. Public shaving and stripping. Destroying identity. Now we escalate, because apparently, metal torture masks were just the warm-up. When Lady Eleanor de Clare was accused of infidelity in 1321 at Caerphilly Castle in Wales, her punishment started with what sounds almost simple. They shaved her head, completely. But they didn't stop at her head. Every single hair on her body. In the castle's great hall, in front of assembled nobles, servants, and visiting dignitaries, Eleanor was forcibly stripped and shaved by the castle's washerwomen while her husband watched from his chair, eating pheasant. Her eyebrows gone. The hair that had taken years to grow past her waist, that marked her status as nobility, gone. And then came the real punishment. She was forced to walk the castle ramparts, completely bald and exposed, for 3 consecutive days during a February cold snap. You need to understand what hair meant for medieval women. It wasn't fashion, it was identity, status, femininity itself. To be publicly shaved marked you as something less than human. It's the medieval equivalent of having your face permanently plastered across social media with cheater stamped across it. Except everyone you'll ever meet can see the evidence growing back. The Annales Monastici records at least 47 cases of noblewomen receiving this punishment across England and France between 1300 and 1450. These women had to live in those same castles, eat in those same halls, see the same people who witnessed their humiliation every single day while waiting months for their hair to return. Your shame became your permanent introduction. One account from Kenilworth Castle describes Alice Perrers, who, after being shaved in 1377, refused to leave her chambers for 8 months. When she finally emerged, her hair had grown back white. At age 29, the cucking stool. Drowning in shame. Picture this, a wooden chair attached to a long beam, positioned over the castle's moat. Sounds almost like a carnival ride, doesn't it? Now picture being strapped into that chair with your wrists bound behind you, then being dunked repeatedly into freezing sewage-contaminated water, while the entire town gathers to watch and jeer. In 1445 at Leeds Castle, Joan Williamson endured 17 dunks into the moat for alleged adultery. The Leeds Castle household accounts describe each dunk lasting the time it takes to say 3 paternosters. roughly 30 to 45 seconds. Imagine being plunged into water so cold your lungs seize. You can't hold your breath properly because you're already gasping from the previous dunk. Moat water wasn't exactly pristine. We're talking raw sewage, dead animals, and whatever diseases were festering in stagnant water. The real genius of this punishment, it was designed to be survivable. Barely. If you drowned, God had judged you guilty. If you survived, you were guilty anyway. But now you had the privilege of living with a lung infection that would probably kill you in 3 months. The Chester City records note that approximately 60% of women subjected to repeated dunkings developed water fever, likely pneumonia or sepsis. And because medieval people had a twisted sense of efficiency, they'd often combine punishments. Shaved first? Sure. Now let's dunk you in freezing water without any hair to protect your scalp from hypothermia. Here's the part that really captures the era's cruelty. This was considered a lenient punishment. Seriously, noble women often requested the cucking stool instead of what's coming next. Mutilation, the permanent mark. Now we enter territory that's genuinely difficult to discuss. When Agnes de Vesky was convicted of adultery at Alnwick Castle in 1296, her nose was cut off. Not metaphorically, not partially. Completely severed with a hot blade that cauterized while it cut. And she was a countess. If this happened to nobility, imagine what happened to common women. The Lanercost Chronicle documents a case from 1317 where Castellan's wife at Carlisle Castle, known only as Mary of Carlisle, was discovered with a household knight. The punishment was precise. Her nose and both ears. The castle's barber surgeon performed the mutilation in the courtyard using shears heated in the forge. Mary survived, but her life effectively ended. No veil could hide the damage. Every person who looked at her knew exactly what she'd been accused of doing. Why the nose? Why the ears? Because medieval society was obsessed with outward signs of inner sin. Your face was supposed to reflect your soul. Mutilation created a permanent mark that said untrustworthy, unfaithful, unworthy to everyone you'd ever meet. It was social death without the mercy of actual death. You couldn't hide it. You couldn't explain it away. The Durham Castle documents list 14 women mutilated for adultery between 1290 and 1340. 14 women whose faces were systematically destroyed to prove a point. And here's the real kicker. In most cases, there was no trial, no evidence, no defense. A husband's accusation was sufficient. Immurement buried alive in castle walls. Take a deep breath, because this one is genuinely the stuff of nightmares. Immurement, being sealed alive inside a wall or tower, was reserved for the most grievous cases of adultery. When Countess Catherine de Thouars was convicted of infidelity at her husband's castle in Brittany in 1378, she was bricked into a small chamber in the castle's north tower, alive. The chamber was roughly 6 feet by 6 feet. They gave her a Bible, a candle, and a small slot through which food and water could be passed. No windows, no light once the candle died, no human contact except the silent hand that pushed bread through the slot twice a day. Catherine lived in that stone coffin for 7 years before she died. Can you imagine? Hour after hour in complete darkness touching the same stone walls, the silence so absolute you'd hear your own heartbeat like war drums. Medieval records describe immured women going completely insane, screaming at the stones, having conversations with hallucinated companions. Some stopped eating, choosing starvation over one more day in the dark. Castle Rushen on the Isle of Man has a sealed chamber in its northwest tower. In 1938, during renovations, workers broke through and found skeletal remains. A woman, still wearing degraded 14th century noble clothing, her hands worn down to polished bone from clawing at the walls. The stone showed scratch marks 3 inches deep in some places. This wasn't execution. It was torture extended over years. The truly twisted part? This was considered merciful, because technically you weren't executed. The church frowned on executing noble women. Their souls needed saving. So instead, they gave you decades to contemplate your sins in a stone tomb that would eventually kill you anyway. The shame procession. Psychological destruction. Let's talk about the punishment that didn't leave physical scars but destroyed women just as effectively. The shame procession. In 1425, Lady Margaret Stafford of Stafford Castle was accused of an affair with her husband's squire. Her punishment? She was forced to walk from the castle to the town church, roughly 2 miles, wearing only a thin shift, barefoot in January, while carrying a candle and publicly confessing her sin at each street corner. But here's what makes this particularly cruel. She had to do it every Sunday for 6 months. 24 walks of shame. 24 times standing at crossroads announcing, "I have betrayed my husband and God." 24 times having children throw mud, adults spit, former friends turn away. The punishment wasn't the cold or the stones that cut her feet. It was watching her entire social world systematically reject her, week after week. The Register of Bishop Gray describes these processions in multiple towns across England. Women carried lit candles, and if the candle went out, from wind, from trembling hands, from the body's failure, the procession had to start over. One woman in York reportedly fainted 3 times during a single walk. Each time, they revived her and made her continue. Medieval society understood something we've almost forgotten. Social death can be worse than physical death. Strip away someone's reputation, community, and dignity, and you've destroyed them more thoroughly than any executioner could. These women continued living, breathing, eating, existing, but they were ghosts. And here's the psychological trap. You couldn't fight back. Any resistance meant escalation to physical punishment. Starvation chambers. The slow vanishing. We need to discuss one more horror that medieval castles specialized in. Starvation chambers. Unlike immurement where you might receive minimal food, starvation chambers were exactly what they sound like. You were locked in, and then nothing. They just waited for you to die. Chepstow Castle in Wales has a chamber that historians call the Forgetting Room. It's a small cell in the castle's foundation, below ground level, accessible only through a trapdoor. In 1405, a woman named Gwenllian was sealed in this chamber for the crime of adultery. The castle records note her imprisonment began in March. They note her death in late May. 9 weeks of slow starvation and absolute darkness. Your body doesn't just quietly shut down when you're starving. First, you burn through all available glucose. That takes about a day. Then your body starts consuming muscle tissue. You become too weak to stand, then too